Hello, grade 4s. I hope you're enjoying your light and shadows unit. This is Mrs. Imrie again, and we're going to talk about some ways to manipulate light. So one of the ways we can manipulate light is to diffuse it. So on a cloudy day or an overcast day, that's what the clouds are doing to the sun. They're diffusing the light so we're not having lots of shadows. And we can do that with sheer curtains or by just putting something that lets the light through but also makes it softer. We can block light. So of course, putting something between the light source and your subject to block the light on it. You can reflect light. So some natural reflectors are snow. You can use water. A wall would be a good natural reflector. And I'm going to talk about how you can make your own reflector as well. You can add light. So artificial light, you can add that to your photo. A good example of that is your camera's flash. You can move your subject closer to or further away from the light source. You can turn your subject toward the light or away from the light. And if your camera allows for it, you can change your camera settings and manipulate how the camera records the light. I find the best way to demonstrate and show how we can manipulate light is to use a human subject because it's easy to see when we're manipulating the light what it's doing to the human face. So we have David here, and in these photos the light is blocked. The light's blocked by the porch and there's only a little bit of light getting on his face. Now in this one, he's standing in the yard, but the house is beside him, and the house is blocking most of the light from the sun. But he is getting light on his face, but it's not very bright. It's kind of just flat light, not showing a whole lot of detail in his face. Now in this one, Brody came along and held up a reflector on his left side, and you can see now that there's a whole lot of light on the left side of his face. So it's a little brighter there. You can see Brody holding up the reflector. And that's why I was saying you can make something like that for yourself out of, snow is naturally reflective, so snow will do this job for you. Or if you could stand someone beside a wall, it would also reflect light back onto the subject. Now here's David. He's standing in the yard again, but he's a little bit further away from the house. So now the sunlight is reaching his face. So it's quite bright on the side of his face. Now here you can see that it's not so harsh and bright now. It's still bright, but there's not a big bright line. And that's because we've diffused the light here. Brody's holding up a white umbrella, which has diffused the light on David and makes him not as, like the sun, not so harsh on his face. And then we came back in because it was kind of cold outside. So here's David in the house, and the curtains are drawn, blocking most of the light. So you can see there's enough light in the room from some of the other windows to take the photo, but not very great light on his face. There you can see him. The curtains are drawn. He's got a silly face, and it looks a little dark, not the greatest light for taking a picture. Now here, I've opened the curtains, and now it's very bright on one half of his face, and there's a little bit of light coming from the window behind him as well. You can see it's very split light here, so it's almost half and half on his face. So one half of his face is in shadow, and one half of his face is brightly lit. And there you can see him now. He's sitting there. The curtain is open a little bit, and you can see how the light is being managed. Now there he is. Now there's more light on his face on the left side. So we've added the reflector in again. And you can see there's the reflector, and it's making it not quite as much contrast. So it's brightening up those shadows on the side of his face. Now here, he's sitting, I've turned and I've changed my way that I'm looking at my subject. So he's sitting in the same place, but I'm looking towards the window now. And so it's lit up on his hair, but his face is pretty dark. Now if I add the white side of my reflector, now you can see his face. He's got light on his hair. The background's really bright, but We can see him. There's a little bit of catch lights in his eyes. And then here I've turned my reflector to its silver side, which is even brighter. Now his face is even more lit up and even more bright in his eyes. And then here I've changed my position to him again. I still have my reflector up, but I've changed my angle, and it's a more pleasing look for his portrait. A little bit of shadow is good, and then a little bit of brightness on the face. There's light in the eyes. His hair has light on them. There you can see where the reflector is and how he's sitting and how the light looks. And here I've just changed his pose a little bit. This is kind of considered a good portrait. There's a little bit of light on the one cheek, and there's light in the eyes, light on the hair, and you can see the shape of his face really well when I turn his face a little bit back toward the light. Here I've used my flash. So you can see it's given me enough light to take the picture indoors, but it's a little bit flat lighting and it's a little bit boring. It doesn't show his face shape that well, but it does let us see what he looks like. He's not too dark, so it's good in that we have enough light to take our photo. And here I've moved him away from the light. So the same amount of light coming from the window, but I've moved him off the couch into a different spot. So now the light is a lot softer on his cheeks, not so bright. There you can see he's away from the window now. Still lots of light coming in that window, but it's not as bright on him. Later in the evening, it became very cloudy, and so we did a few more portraits just to show how the changing light affected our portrait. So here's David sitting on the couch. You can see it's quite dark on his face. The blind is drawn, so that diffuses the light, as well as it was cloudy out, so that's further diffusing the light. Here he is sitting. I've kind of done the pose again so you can see the shape of his face, a little bit of light on the left cheek, light in both eyes. But it is more of a darker portrait, not so brightly lit. So you can see in those examples how changing the light and changing the way we use light really changed the way the portrait looked of David. Now here's some outdoor ones. Here's a leaf that doesn't have any light on it on the front. It's lit up in the back, but so it's very dark. You can't really see any detail in the leaf, just a little bit of a cut in the middle of it where the color is coming through from the back. And if we expose a little bit better for the leaf, now we can see the texture and color of the leaf a lot better. And here, if we backlit the leaves, the light is coming from behind them. It's really lighting them up, and we can see their color. And so it's just different ways of how that light is going to look when we use it in different ways on a subject. Now, I had talked about making your own reflector. And so I know that you guys don't all have access to camera equipment, but you can make your own reflector by using a sheet of paper, or you could use a piece of tin foil. If you want a little bit brighter reflector, you can glue a bit of tin foil to a piece of cardboard, or glue your paper to a cardboard, and that will make you a small reflector. And that's what I used on this photo of these flowers. You can see that the light is from behind the flowers, lighting up their petals and making them really pretty, but then it would make the front of them really dark if I didn't use a reflector. So I put a little bit of paper in front of them, and that bounced the light back onto the flowers and made them so you can see their pink color. The same with these crocuses. The light is from behind and it's quite bright, and it's lighting up the edge of the crocus, and they would have actually appeared quite dark. So I used a bit of paper and bounced the light back toward them and lit them up. So that's an easy thing you can do at home. You could also try a larger piece of cardboard if your mom has any white fabric, you can put some white fabric on some cardboard, and that will also make you a larger reflector for portraits. Here are a few more examples of just moving your subject and then or moving yourself. So here's our friend, and his face has light on one half and shadow on the other half. And even when I took the photo, I thought it was a little bit dark on the one side. So I moved to the other side of him, and there you can see now his face is nicely lit on both sides, and there's light in his eyes, and we can see him a lot better. Here in a portrait of this man, the light was coming from behind, so I used a reflector to put light back into his face. You can see there's catch lights in his eyes, and it's a little bit brighter on one side of his face and a little darker on the other side, and that's what you want in a portrait so that it doesn't look too flat, so that you can see the shape of the face. Here's a portrait that Brody took of me for this class, actually, when he was in grade 4. And same thing, you can see some light in my hair, some catch lights in my eyes, and it's a little brighter on one side of my face than the other. Here's one that Brody took as well, and the puppy. He's black, so he's actually very difficult to photograph, especially in the sun, because the contrast between his black fur and the sun makes him quite difficult to get a picture of. So we put him in the shade, and then you can actually get a good photo of him, and you can see there's a little bit of catch lights in his eyes. So I think that one turned out quite well for Brody. Here again, you can see there's bright light on David's cheeks, but then shadow on the other side, and his eyes aren't lit up that well because he's kind of looking down, whereas here he's looking up a little more diffused light on his face. So you can see how just changing where your subject is and their light, how it just really changes the whole look of their picture. So I hope that gives you guys some good ideas and examples of how you can use light in different ways, how you can manipulate it to achieve the picture you want, particularly portraits, because you're really going to see it on the face, how those changes make such a difference.